Welcome back to Weekends with Anna and Michael. Joining us now is the wonderful Briahna Joy Gray. Briahna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So just wanted to catch up with you, see how you're doing. How is life after the Bernie campaign? It's been a pretty crazy few months, and I see some of the reactions to you on Twitter, which is pretty disheartening. But how are you holding up?
I'm doing as well as can be expected. Obviously, the campaign ending is a personal difficulty for all of us who were so committed to the ideologies that were represented, and which unfortunately don't have a lot of other homes in our mainstream political sphere. But we're also all obviously dealing with the larger crisis of the coronavirus pandemic. And those things compounded have made it a really interesting transition, right? So I've never worked on a campaign before, but I imagine that normally you're able to see the people that you've worked with and bonded with and been in the trenches with for the past years and say your goodbyes. And this hasn't been that normal experience. So we've been doing a lot of, cocktail FaceTime house party sessions with the crew from work, but it's not quite the same, but we're figuring it
out. Bree, let's just stay on that for a second, because I actually think these reactions to you and other people are revelatory of a very, very different mindset that does exist inside the broader Democratic Party. When people say, Bree, David Sirota, you're never going to work in this town again. And then you look and you say, why? Like, did Bree, key one of these people's cars? No. Did any, what are you talking about? Oh, they're committed to an agenda of healthcare for all and other core tenets that the whole Sanders campaign was about, and they're still advocating about those. Why does it? What is it about? Again, it's one thing to have disagreements. It's one thing to have different strategic approaches. There is something that freaks out a certain type of operative so much when people, including just the Sanders campaign as a whole, which in my view was incredibly accommodating and moderate. Like if I was on the comms team, there would have been some different answers. So that it still makes people, like, just the idea that you are clear on something freaks them out. And I mean, look, take it whatever direction you want to go in, but what do you make of just the mindset of that upsetting people so much, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, I think that what it really exposes is the extent to which there aren't a lot of substantive arguments on the center left, whatever you want to call it, neoliberals, corporate Democrats, etc. There's not a lot of substantive arguments to push back against the very basic asks that we're making. So that when I, tweet a simple truism like, yes, people shouldn't die because they're poor and can't afford coronavirus treatment, but that also extends to people who are dealing with cancer or people who are dealing with diabetes. There's this kind of meltdown because if you have accepted the initial logic for coronavirus, there really isn't a ethical line you can draw in the sand, or even really a practical line in the sand that you can draw. So you have to default to name calling ad hominems, threatening my future livelihood, et cetera. And it's particularly marked, I think, when it comes to me, because so much of the kind of mainstream liberal discourse has been completely captured by the identifying good actors and bad actors kind of purely based on their identity, their physiognomy. And when confronted with a Black woman who also happens to believe in Medicare for all and a living wage and student debt cancellation and medical debt cancellation and some basic progressive principles, they don't quite know what to say or to do with that. And so I think that's why I and Nina Turner have been kind of lightning rods for a certain kind of meltdown or tantrum throwing, if you will.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think that this particular primary election really clarified things for me in understanding and realizing that the very issues that these, moderate Democrats claim they care about are just issues that they will exploit for political gain. But when it comes to their actions, they don't actually care about various disenfranchised groups of people, right? So the news cycle and the lack of real substantive response in regard to, some of the allegations against Michael Bloomberg, like, blew my mind. The friendly treatment toward people like Michael Bloomberg blew my mind. Yeah. The way that Tara Reade is being treated right now, after she came forward with incredibly substantive and credible allegations against Joe Biden. I mean, at this point, it's not blowing my mind because it's a pattern that I'm familiar with. And the way that you were treated was just so incredibly disgusting, not just during the primary election, but even today. The photoshopped images of you and Nina Turner, some of the statements that were made about you during Jason Johnson's interview, which got him in a little bit of trouble. But it just really does help me and help others, I think, crystallize the issue with the Democratic Party right now, where they position themselves as these defenders and warriors of disenfranchised groups of people. But at the same time, when push comes to shove and when they're challenged from the left, those very people don't matter to them at all and must be destroyed.
Yeah, I have no doubt that Jason Johnson will, in fact, work in this town again. But the same isn't true of any number of people who have the decency to basically just say what overwhelming majorities of Americans, not just overwhelming majorities of Democrats, but majorities of independents as well, and Americans overall support. And this is something that I used to write about before I joined this campaign, and which I thought was going to be almost a more central issue in this campaign as an issue between candidates. I really anticipated that Kamala Harris would have longer legs in her campaign, and that it was going to be a question of why should we vote for an old white man when there is this Black woman in the race. But what actually became clear, and even made more interesting by kind of recent polls, which have shown that it's white people who are much more concerned or disappointed by a white candidate being the nominee than Black people or other people of color, is that the interest in these kind of glass ceiling breaking campaigns, the interest in whether or not a candidate is able to corral a certain amount or solicit a certain amount of support from groups of color is only relevant insofar as it advances a more moderate political agenda. So Bernie Sanders, number one with Latino voters. The first diverse state to vote in the election was Nevada. We won 70% of the Latino vote, and people were silent. You could hear a pin drop when it came to the discussion about what that meant for Bernie Sanders' coalition. And you had Soledad O'Brien tweeting, "Okay, well, he won the first three states. Let's see what happens when an actually diverse state wins." And it's like complete and total erasure of Latinos without even a second thought. And there's no political blowback. There's no consternation about it. Bernie Sanders was either number one or number two with Black voters for the entire duration of the race. I remember an article shortly before I left The Intercept, which pointed out that Bernie Sanders outpolled Kamala Harris 2-1 with Black voters. But that was a non-story. Nobody cared. As long as there was anyone polling better than him with Black voters, then that became not just a story about how does he, bolster outreach, but it became a story that was supposed to, I think, imply something intrinsically racist or corrupted about the campaign and the messaging as a whole. A kind of subtext which never existed even for candidates like Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, who struggled to get out or never did successfully get out of single digits. And you had the New York Times co-endorsing two candidates that were supposed to be, history making because of their gender. And there was a lot of ballyhooing about Bernie Sanders and the Black vote. But both Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren together at the time of the New York Times endorsement captured a grand total of 10% of the Black vote. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders was at something like 20%, and Joe Biden was leading the pack at something like 40%. So as a Black person, and as a woman now in the context of these Me Too allegations against Joe Biden, it is deeply disappointing on a personal level to see how insincere the identity trappings that have become the sole, complete, and total politics of the Democratic Party now are. If you are going to be the party of identity, at least have those values concretized, at least believe in that on some intrinsic level. And what they're doing right now is giving free rein and fodder to every bad faith, racist, sexist individual on the right who has always claimed that the Democrats never truly believed any of this stuff. And now when you see Democrats using the exact same language that was used against Christine Blasey Ford in the course of the Kavanaugh hearing, you know, it's difficult to see where we're going to go next if the Democratic Party doesn't substantially reform and also adopt a lot of the economic populist principles that are motivating a lot of the political activity on both sides of the aisle.